It's Pentecost. It's the birthday of the church. We commemorate today the birthday of the church. This is the beginning of the church. This is the day the church found life. Pentecost, the outpouring of the Holy Spirit upon Mary and the apostles in the upper room. Kita merayakan hari ini Hari Raya Pentekosta. Pencurahan kehadiran Roh Kudus ke atas para rasul dan Bonda Maria. The first reading, the Acts of the Apostles, gives you a clear image, a story of what happened on Pentecost. They were all in the upper room and in fear behind closed doors. And then there was a breath of Spirit, a wind of Spirit that took hold of them. The very presence of the Lord. And life changed everything for them. It is known as the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit changed the whole life of every one of them. Something took place in them. And as the Acts of the Apostles would say, they went out. They went out without fear, speaking in different languages, speaking in different words, and they proclaim. It's simply the presence of God and the mission of the church. Kehadiran Tuhan dan misi gereja. Kehadiran Tuhan dan misi gereja. The presence of God and the mission of the church. That took place on this very day, on Pentecost. Something happened. Just a little background of this Pentecost. This word Pentecost simply means 50 days. That's all. It means 50 days. If you look back at the resurrection, when Jesus took leave of the disciples and the apostles on the resurrection, it was 40 days after that, the ascension. And after that, it's Pentecost. And Jesus promised them, just as the Father sent me and I'm with you, and I have to leave you, but I leave behind an advocate, something so strong in you, and that is the gift of the Holy Spirit. Something that will change your life so much. And this word, 50 days, actually takes its root from the Old Testament. It's about the harvest festival. And they were waiting for the harvest, and at 50 days, they were able to celebrate in thanksgiving. And that's how we look into our spiritual life. What is interesting about this is the Spirit alive in you. Is God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit, alive in you this very moment? Because the most important thing that you need to ask is, when the Holy Spirit takes hold of you, life changes. Life is no longer the same. The old dies and the new takes. This morning, I'm just going to throw a couple of questions. You know, the RCIA team here is important for them because they're having their right of commissioning today. But I won't put them to the test today. I'm just going to throw this in the open. When do you think the Holy Spirit takes hold of us? When do you think the Holy Spirit enters into our life? Ketika saat bilakah Roh Kudus ini dicurahkan, menerima dalam kehidupan kita? When? Anyone? Is it confirmation? How many of you say confirmation? Raise your hands. Oh my God. How many of you say it's in baptism? Raise your hands. Ketika bilakah kamu menerima Roh Kudus dalam hidup kamu? Come, let's have some serious moments now. How many of you say it's in baptism? Kindly raise your hands. Yang kamu ketika bila menerima Roh Kudus? Belum terima lagi. My dear friends, it's important to you to recognize this moment. It's on the day of your baptism, the Holy Spirit takes hold of your life. On the very day of your baptism, the Holy Spirit enters into your life. And then the Holy Spirit goes to sleep. You won't believe it, you watch the babies. After baptism, they sleep off. That's what happens. The Holy Spirit actually sleeps off in you. In many of us, it sleeps off. And then when it wakes up, when do you think the Holy Spirit wakes up? Confirmation. They come before the bishop, and the bishop said, receive the Holy Spirit. And then he taps them. And then they wake up. Then all of a sudden they go back to sleep forever. I'm telling you the truth. You just look around you. They go back to sleep. They don't come to church. They don't see them. They're hardly around. You don't see them around. The Holy Spirit just goes to sleep. It reminds me of the story of Jairus, the official's daughter, was sick. And when Jesus reached the home, the servants and the officials ran out and says, your daughter is dead. And Jesus says, she's not dead. She is sleep. Talita kum, wake up, little girl. Many of us, our spirits are asleep. It is asleep, my dear friends. We are asleep. We are totally asleep. You know, I'll give you a simple analogy to just picture this life of the Spirit, this indwelling and this change in the Spirit. Just imagine you're in the evening of the day. It's about 7, 8 o'clock in the night. And all of a sudden there's a blackout. Everything goes pitch dark and everything is in darkness. What's the first thing you will look for? Candle, your house still using candles. Most of us will look for a flashlight or a torchlight. Am I right? What happens when you open up the torchlight and there's no batteries? What happens if you get your flashlight and you realize your batteries are dead? Then you'll be in darkness. That's the spiritual life. You may have the flashlight with you, but you don't have the batteries. Because your batteries are dead. That's the spiritual life. And that's what St. Paul tells to the church in Romans. If you live by the flesh, you are dead to the flesh. If you live by the Spirit, you are alive. You are totally alive in the Spirit. And sometimes you can see this. I was just sharing with the parishioners yesterday at Mass about my experience of the Spirit and how I see the Spirit. You know, back when I was in my secondary school, I always had difficulty with maths. You know, I was never good with maths. And so my mother got me enrolled into a tuition center. But the distance from home to the center was about 3-4 kilometers. And so I had to cycle. You know, I had to cycle. And after class, it's about 8-9 o'clock, I had to cycle back home. And I had to use my little lamp. And it all depended on my dynamo. Some of you wondering, what is dynamo, Father? You may have never seen a dynamo on a bicycle, you know. And it all depends on how fast and how hard I pedaled on it. That's spirituality. That's spiritual life of the Spirit. The harder you live in the Spirit, the brighter your life is. The harder you pedal on that life, the greater the vision of your life is in the Spirit. That's all. That is all about the Spirit. But the question we could ask ourselves this morning is simply this. How do you know you have the Spirit in you? How do you find the Spirit alive in you? Bagaimana kita boleh merasai menikmati kehadiran Roh Kudus dalam kehidupan kita? Bagaimana kita membawa kesaksian ke dalam Roh Kudus itu? How do you see it? Tell me, how do you see the Holy Spirit? You can't see it. It's a breath, it's a wind, it's a ruh, as they said. How do you see it in your life? Anyone? Come, tell me, how do you see the Holy Spirit? Yesterday's parishioners was dead silence. And I told myself, maybe the 9 a.m. one will be alive. Tell me, how do you see the Holy Spirit? What is the proof of the Holy Spirit in you? Sorry? Your actions? Sorry? Here? I can't hear you. Could you speak louder? Gifts of the Holy Spirit. Good. One of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Only one way, my dear friends. If you want to test whether you have the Holy Spirit in you, if you want to see whether the Holy Spirit is alive in you, Galatians 5:22-23. The fruits of the Holy Spirit. If you have the fruits in you, you're alive. That's all. Love. There is 9 fruits of the Holy Spirit. The first one is love, joy, peace, kindness, patience, tolerance, self-control. Take a moment this morning and look at Galatians 5:22. Buah roh dalam kesaksian hidup. Surat Paulus ke jemaah di Galatia bab 5 ayat 22. Itu saja kehadiran Roh Kudus dalam kehidupan kesaksian kita. Semuanya disenaraikan di dalam ayat-ayat Paulus. It's all there. If you have love, you have joy, you have peace, you have kindness, you have patience, you have forbearance, self-control, you are in the Spirit. You are alive in the Spirit. Everything is alive in you. Because in each one of us, my dear friends, there is a warfare that is taking place. There is a spiritual battle that is going on in us. Even at this very moment, there is a struggle and a wrestle that is going on in us. As St. Paul says, what you want to do and what you end up doing. There's a struggle in us. We are all tempted in many ways. We struggle with it every day of our life. The moment we switch on our computer, the moment we are surfing the net, there is a temptation between the flesh and the spirit. The moment we are stopped by an authority, the moment we walk into a restaurant, the moment we see someone we don't like, there is a struggle in us. The moment you wake up in the morning, when you're on the road, when you're on the traffic, every moment there is a warfare that is going on. That's why when you keep watching movies, all the superhero, Spider-Man, Superman, Batman, Robin, all this, it's always a force between two. Between the good and the bad. The question is, where do you stand in the Spirit? Whether you're on the Spirit or you're on the dark side, When I was growing up in my early years, and there was one special movie that just caught me, that I became so engrossed with, about this warfare, of the spiritual warfare. It's a special movie that, it's just in one of those classic old movies, Do you know which movie is it? Star Wars. I just got mesmerized with Star Wars. I could sit down and watch over and over again Star Wars. It's a battle between the force, but the force is not out there. It's an inner force that's going on. If you remember the movie, it's about this young man, Luke Skywalker. And he begins this whole journey in search for his identity and his self. And he doesn't realize that something in him is pushing him further and further into it. And he's searching for that. But he has to face the evil one. Who was the evil one? Darth Vader. He had to face that force. But at the end of that whole experience, he keeps listening to this voice inside him. You know what was that voice? What was that phrase, that great phrase in Star Wars? May the force be with you. If you have the Holy Spirit, the force is with you, my dear friends. And you can take upon yourself that battle of life. If that force is with you, you can face all temptations. No matter what happens in your life, nothing can take you because the force of the Holy Spirit in you. But the question is your battery dead? Is it half charged? Is it fully charged? Or do you have batteries with you? That's the force of the Spirit in you. For some of us, it's asleep. It's totally asleep. And then when a crisis comes, you find yourself in the greatest challenge of life. Because everything is in a state of chaos. And you can't find a moment to it. And then you fall. And then I fall. It's always about waking up. That's why, my dear friends, do you know where the Spirit is now? It's here. It's down at there. Lying there asleep. And all you need to do is to use the word of St. Paul. Stir the grace in you. Fan the flame in you. That's what St. Paul says. My mother says it differently. She said, Michael, stir the Milo before you drink. Because it's at the bottom. Stir the Milo before you drink, Michael. When you buy a packet drink, shake well before drink. Because it's all there, lying at the bottom. And sometimes we are just comfortable if we can sleep a bit more longer. That's the spirituality of our life, my dear friends. If you're alive, you're alive. If you're asleep, you're asleep. If you are dead, you are dead to the Spirit. And the fruits of the Spirit is there. Let us ask the Lord the grace today on the birthday of the church, that you and I will just pray for the outpouring of the Spirit, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, and the fruits of the Holy Spirit, because you will be my witnesses to the ends of the earth.